let's do either a virtual hand raise or a physical hand raise to show who has heard of the Scarborough Center for Healthy Communities. Not seeing a lot of hands. And oh, I see one hand. Yes. We're a 200 plus person organization, but we tend to be a bit of a sleeping giant in that not everyone is aware of our scope and our services. And so I'm really happy to be able to share some of that information today. So our overview and core goals are listed on screen now, and we have a very clever acronym of saying that I care. And what this comes down to is the Scarborough Center for Healthy Communities has been in Scarborough since 1977 and has been responding to the health needs of the community since its inception. We have a goal to remain client-centered and to integrate and engage and be proactive within our work in the community. Our mission and vision are also posted on the screen now. And it summarizes to, we are dedicated to serving the diverse and holistic needs of the community with the vision to become a community leader in health and wellness programs. And as I go through today's presentation, we'll learn more about what exactly that means. And what I hope it means for all of you is that you recognize that you've got one more agency in your corner that's here to support you. And so then a little bit more about how I want today to look. I do want this to be a safe space where everyone feels comfortable to engage, recognizing that caregiving can be a big topic. And the more comfortable and safe we can feel in sharing and learning about the topic, I believe everyone can get more out of it. And so to ensure that we do have a safe space, I want to lay out some ground rules. I want to make sure everyone knows that they are welcome and that all questions are valid and welcomed here, and that everyone will be respected. Both comments, questions, and concerns can be voiced without judgment. Part of that is hopefully respecting others as they voice their questions, comments, concerns, or opinions, and recognizing them as their opinions. With that, especially later when we get into the Q&A, trying to not speak over each other and letting everyone have the opportunity to speak, as well as having a bit of confidentiality, recognizing that comments that are said in this Zoom room will stay in this Zoom room. And I'm also going to try to be very respectful of your time this evening, so I really do appreciate having the opportunity to share. If there's anything anyone would like to see on this list to make them feel safe, I would encourage you to type that into the chat now. But with that said, I can also start to cover a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. So in the topic of caregivers, as I mentioned, you are the experts, but I am going to provide a little bit of definitions to start to clarify some things. And we're going to talk a bit about the caregiver journey, as well as how we can support ourselves and others along this journey, and different avenues to promote our own wellness. And so I want to get a little bit of a better understanding of who we have here today. And so we have a poll, and there's 4 questions in the poll, but I only want you to, we're going to do this by typing into the chat. So in the chat, I would like you to say, just type out, if you feel comfortable, to just type who you're here supporting or who you are the main caregiver for. And it can be your spouse or a partner, maybe it's a parent, a child, a relative, or just a friend. Just so I can get a better understanding of who we have in this great circle. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Zoom chat, along the bottom of your screen, you should see a couple icons, one of which says chat. If you click that twice, a window will open on the right-hand side of your screen. At the bottom, it will say type message here. You can enter any text that you would like to share and then press enter to send. And so just looking, we've got mom, dad, uncle, father, also mom, dad, uncle from one person, aunt, mother. So we've got lots of individuals that I'm going to start by categorizing as in that potentially sandwich generation. So when I say that, that could be someone who is supporting their aging parents, And so I think each caregiver journey is unique, but I'm happy to see that we have some common elements and overlap, because I think that recognizing that while this journey can feel very isolating, that there are others who are walking on a similar path. And in case there is any doubt about how many other people are walking on that path, I have a graph, and this might surprise some people, but to some people, this might seem quite common. And so to give a little bit of context here, I'm going to start with the definition of who is a caregiver. And each of us might think of a different thing when we hear that word caregiver. But for my purpose, a caregiver is someone who is providing support to someone without compensation or professional gain. This means a caregiver can be a family member. As we've seen, it can be adult children, nieces, nephews. It could be a spouse or a partner. It can also be a friend or a community member. You may also hear terms like care partner or carer or informal caregiver. This is contrasted with the paid role of being a professional care provider. And so with that definition in mind, we can now look at the slide that outlines the proportion of people aged 15 and older who are caregivers. And this is from 2018. So if anything, you can just pump some of those numbers up, as we do know that the number of informal caregivers in Canada has increased since 2018, and not least because of the pandemic. For anyone who is looking at that graph, is there any surprises? Is anyone thinking that's maybe more than they thought or less than they thought? Now, the numbers are a bit small, and so in summary, it's about 1 in 4 Canadians are acting as caregivers, and that average peaks to even higher than that in the age bracket of 45 to 65. So I think we've seen a little bit of that already in our group, recognizing that that category tends to be also in their working group, and they're supporting their adults, their aging parents. So again, you can type into the chat if you were surprised by these numbers, or if there's maybe you hadn't even considered that, the volume of caregivers in Canada. I know for me, I recognize that this is also an underrepresentation, because a lot of caregivers don't fully identify with the role, and because they don't identify, they might not be connected to supports. And we do know that over the course of the pandemic, there's been a 14% increase in caregivers in Canada, and caregivers themselves are providing on average 4 hours per week more of care. And so we're surprised by the number of very young caregivers. Thank you, that's a great point, because this graph doesn't go below the age of 15, and we do know that there are young caregivers that are providing support to a loved one even before the age of 15. And for this group, it can be particularly challenging to get support because you're not recognized, or the support that you provide might not be realized. We expected the sandwich generation to get press coverage, and you'd think that with that volume of people supporting it, there would be a little bit more, I don't want to say hoots and hollers. I think part of it might be that the amount of fatigue and the amount of work, and we're going to go into a little bit of why there might be less hooting and hollering, and a little bit about what it means. And so seeing all those numbers and thinking about what it might mean to be a caregiver. And some of you may experience, some of you may identify as a caregiver, but a lot of people don't. And this is part of the reason why I believe there is both an underrepresentation, and there isn't as much possibly press coverage or hooting and hollering as we might expect. A lot of the time, we take on the caregiving role without expectation or without being planned necessarily. We will sometimes fall into the role thinking that, oh, I'm just being a good daughter. I'm just being a good granddaughter. I'm just being a good niece, a good friend, a good neighbor. And oftentimes we take on these caregiving duties without even realizing that we are caregivers. And while that's very common, it can also be detrimental, because without realizing the role of a caregiver, we don't always recognize the emotions that come along with that. And we don't reach out to get the support that we need within that role. And we'll talk a lot more about accessing support later. And I might sound like a bit of a broken record throughout today, but recognizing the value of sort of naming something and recognizing that role and the value that that recognition can have on one's own well-being. Because we know the caregiving journey can be varied, and the more we're able to come to terms and validate our feelings, the better we're able to approach the situations, as varied as it is. I sometimes like to think about it as if I was going to a new country. So this would either be imagining way back when that was allowed to happen, or maybe thinking ahead to when I might be able to do that again. But if I was going to go to a new country, I would prepare myself. I would recognize that I'm going to be in an unfamiliar place. I'm going to be faced with challenges. And while I might not know what all those challenges are, I would want to set myself up for success. And so maybe I'm not going to be able to learn the local language, but I could be able to pick up a few phrases. But the more research and the more we can arm ourselves with knowledge going into any unknown situation, the better we feel we can handle the various steps and maybe potentially left turns that come our way on that journey. And so asking the question, am I a caregiver, might be something that you may have never posed to yourself, but you may identify with. And I'm going to share a video now to bring in the voices of caregivers and just to see how we feel and if we can relate to any of their stories. And so you can just mind me while I set technology up.
We enter and leave this world needing care. It's a universal part of being human. Maybe because it's so universal, we take it for granted. Like air, we only notice it when we need it, and it's not there. And maybe that's why, in all our conversations about healthcare, we don't often talk about the millions of individuals caring for their loved ones with chronic conditions. Unpaid caregivers, showing up every day, not because it's their job, but because they care. With great care comes great consequences on a caregiver's own health and well-being. It takes a toll on caregivers, finances, and family. We will all, at one point in our lives, need or receive care. Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany, and Embracing Carers are committed to supporting caregivers worldwide through raising awareness and motivating action. Start caring.
I wonder if there are any thoughts in seeing that video. And I do recognize that those statistics weren't from Canada, but I do think they ring true to just the scope of the impact that caregiving can have. And so I have some Canadian statistics to follow that up. And you might start to be identifying with some of the individuals in that video and being able to maybe think about some of the impacts that your caregiving journey has meant for you. Because we know that it can be a varied journey. And so on the caregiving journey, there's lots of different roles that come to mind. I know for me personally, when I think of the word caregiver, I often picture someone providing hands-on support first, which I think undershadows some of the other support that caregivers provide. On the slide now, it shows that the most common types of support that caregivers provide is transportation, housework, household maintenance, and scheduling and coordinating appointments. And these are often the tasks that can snowball. We're just doing a few things. We're picking up some medication. We're scheduling appointments. We ensure that our loved one doesn't miss a single medical appointment and realize that we haven't gone to the optometrist in 5 years. And this picture is also very varied for what this means for individuals. For about 40% of Canadian caregivers, they spend about 1 to 3 hours per week on caring. And so this could mean tucking things in on weeknights or maybe spending the bulk of time on the weekends. But for 21% of caregivers, they'll be spending 20 or more hours. And this can vary depending on the type of care. But recognizing that for primary caregivers, it can be a significant shift in one's life and the structure of one's day. And that everyone within the circle of care is going to be impacted to different levels. And so with that said, there's no real minimum to what it means to be a caregiver. And there's no need to say, well, I'm not being a caregiver because I only do a few things. But recognizing that it's going to be unique and it's going to be varied, but the more we can recognize the different roles that we carry, the more we can validate the emotions and the feelings that may come along with that journey. And it can also help us to recognize the impact of the caregiving journey on all of those in the circle of care. And I think this brings up the point that was made earlier about it can be surprising to think of the number of young caregivers. Oftentimes we imagine that single primary caregiver, the one who's doing it all. And we may not realize what that means for other people within that circle. I know for myself, I acted as a young caregiver for my grandfather. While I was not his primary caregiver, I was there to provide support, sometimes to him directly, but more often to my mother, who was acting as his primary caregiver. And recognizing the dynamics in that situation, I wish I had recognized it more when I was at that age. It would have made going through high school a bit easier. And so having those conversations and seeing the impact, I feel, as I've said, it's just important to be able to recognize what that role is and what it means for everyone involved. Are there any thoughts or comments about either the video or some of the numbers that are on screen now? And one thing that's pretty common with every caregiving journey is some of the range of emotions. And we can start to see, how are we feeling today? And so I'm going to launch a poll. There are 4 questions in this poll, 2 of which we've already actually posed, and the latter 2 are sort of new questions. And so you can take a moment to answer all 4 questions. And then once you have, I just want to use a little bit of that to base the next part of our discussion. And so if you're not familiar with Zoom polls, you should see a window on screen now. You've got the 4 questions. You will have to scroll down the poll itself to answer them. You can just hit whichever option is relevant to you. And then once you've answered all 4 questions, you can press that submit button. And so we'll give everyone a moment to fill in that poll. And if anyone is having difficulties with the poll, you don't have to answer it, but it is nice to be able to consider where everyone is at today and where they're at on their caregiving journey. And I appreciate the comments in the chat. as we start to think about what the holistic impact of caregiving is. So we've got the answers coming in. I'll leave it open for maybe 10 or so more seconds. But seeing how things come in, shocking. Everyone's getting the first question right of how many Canadians act as caregivers. I'm glad we were paying attention. And as we sort of got in the chat, we've got a majority of people are looking after their parent or potentially another relative. And then the one that I was pretty sure was going to be the most varied when we start to think about how we're doing today. And so I'm going to end the poll now. And so when we're looking at how we're doing today, we are all over the board. And the importance of recognizing that is huge. Not only is it important to recognize our role as a caregiver, but recognizing our emotions. And this goes back to a psychology principle called name it, don't numb it, where when we can recognize and name our emotions, whether they're positive or negative, we can help to validate our experiences. And then if it is a positive experience, we can recognize and maybe draw on that and see how we can cultivate those experiences again. And if it's negative, we can help to really identify the root causes rather than just accepting the emotion. Where saying I was stressed driving home just makes me feel like the entire time was just that negative emotion. Where I can say, I can sort of pinpoint it down. And this is a very surface level example, but I was stressed when I was between two TTC buses and the one behind me honked at me. And focusing on just that moment to help me to recognize where that stress was coming from. So when I parked my car, I could look up at the blue sky and be like, that's experience is past. And I don't want to bring that with me. Because it can be so easy, especially in the caregiving journey, to bring our emotions with us throughout our day. We may have those constant feelings, and fatigue was our number one response. And I think that is something that everyone can identify with, that part of being a caregiver is that feeling that you're constantly on. You constantly have that phone with you. And if it's the phone number and if it's from the home, you have that panic attack of what has happened. Or maybe it's you see that email and you have to stop everything because you can't move on until you know what that message says. And being able to recognize those emotions and really find those root causes can be helpful. But at the very first, just recognizing them and validating them because they're all welcomed. We know that the caregiving journey can be stressful and there can be immense feelings of guilt and regret on a journey that's so uncontrollable. But we also want to celebrate those positive moments because, yeah, sometimes things are really funny. I worked in my former role, I worked at the Alzheimer's Society in a day program. And individuals with young onset dementia, and some of the greatest moments and just pure hilarity came up when they were discussing sort of the benefits of it didn't matter if they didn't remember their neighbor's name because they didn't have to, or they could rewatch their favorite TV shows and it was just as funny, and celebrating those moments and embracing the humor in it. And recognizing also that our moods will change. There can be good days, and then there can be good 5 minutes, and it can change. And when we're expressing our emotions, not just to ourselves, but also including others in that circle of care. And one thing that we recommend is when we're sharing our emotions to use I feel statements. This can help to not only validate things for ourselves, but it helps to ensure that the conversation doesn't come across as confrontational. So it could be a statement where I feel like I'm not being supported. I feel like I'm doing it all on my own. Versus saying, I'm the only one here. No one is helping me. And while it can be a very stressful situation within that circle of care and that division of support, especially from that primary caregiver who's reaching out or feeling as though they don't have anyone to reach out to, leading with statements like that can help others to understand where you're coming from, as from the outside, it can be very difficult to understand what this journey will mean. And when we go a little bit more personal to that, also thinking about how we express our emotions. Are we someone who gets really quiet and bottles things up? Or do we express things very visually on our face so everyone knows how we feel, and recognizing how that might come across? And the big dynamic nature. And all of that comes in with the journey and the journey of caregiving. And the roller coaster choice is very deliberate in the idea that there are ups and there are downs, and there is no detailed map. Being a caregiver means that you will be pushed to learn new things and overcome obstacles you never anticipated. It forces you to be creative and resilient, and that's not easy. And recognizing that there is no perfect path, there is no ideal line to walk, can help us to reconcile with emotions when we feel that guilt of, oh, I'm being a bad caregiver. And just recognizing that we're doing the best we can, and there are situations that are far beyond our control. And so when things don't go as they're planned, it's not a fault of our own, but it is the turn in the tracks, and that's the way the path is going. And while we can say that to ourselves, believing it and understanding it can take time. And so I don't expect today to be a flip of a switch, but just those little constant reminders can be helpful. And I'm going to share some terms now that we might not know, but we may relate with. And these are, again, just some terms that we can use to help to describe our emotions along the caregiving journey and potentially recognize the impact that it might be having. And so my first term is ambiguous loss. And if you've heard this term before, you can raise your hand visually or virtually. It's not a super common word. It's a lot of points in Scrabble, but it might be something that we actually can identify with. I got a hand, yay. So it refers to a loss that is associated with a lack of information. And so this can happen when perhaps someone is still present, but they're losing their capacities, or when long-standing relationships change, or maybe when someone is in surgery and there is that lack of information. And the challenge with these losses is because they happen while a loved one is still present, from the outside, it doesn't make sense to grieve. And so we freeze that grieving process. And that can cause our emotions to sort of build up and stagnate and not allow us to find closure when we need to. And it can be big things, like a move into a home, or it can be things where we recognize that that might be the last time we get to play a game of cards with our loved one because their capacities are reducing to the fact where that is not a viable, they don't find enjoyment in that. Or when a child starts to feel like they're being the parent to their parent, and there's that role reversal. And recognizing those dynamic changes can really help us to understand some of the grief that will come up and help to identify the root cause of some of those emotions. Are there any thoughts about ambiguous loss? It's definitely something that we don't hear in our everyday, but it might be able to hit the nail on the head for some feelings. And our next term is burnout. And this is probably a word that we're all very familiar with at this point. And going back to research, because that's where I like to hang out, recognizing that burnout, by definition, is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. This can occur when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and you have a buildup of compassion fatigue. And this can impact the health and well-being of both yourself and the person you're caring for, as well as those in the circle of care. As I mentioned earlier, we set out wanting to be the good daughter, the good son, the good aunt, the good uncle, or niece, nephew, relative, person. And due to the stressors that we put on and the tasks that come on slowly, and we can do that, or of course I'll take on that task, we can whittle ourselves down to the point where the other aspects of our lives, we just don't have the energy to care. And there's danger there when it becomes we don't have the energy to care for ourselves. We also may recognize that we have become advocates. When we have to get up on our soapboxes and be the champion for our loved one, it can be challenging. It can be intimidating. Having conversations about goals of care can help us to have the confidence to speak up on what our loved one would want and to be able to understand that the decisions we're making are the decisions that our loved one would want. But having those conversations can be awkward, and talking about advanced care planning can be difficult. And that's almost that, well, that is an entire other presentation in itself. But I think it's important, so I brought up a little bit of that topic here and would be happy to field more questions about that later. And in line with speaking up, we also have to ask a lot of questions. And we might find ourselves all of a sudden having to become experts and researchers, trying to understand complex medical conditions or legal parameters, or trying to figure out the Ontario healthcare system as a constantly moving labyrinth. And recognizing the stress that that can put on us and thinking that we have to do that all on ourselves. And even finding information can be challenging. And so when we start to think about how we can support ourselves in this role, when we look at information, we can start to be more critical. Or we can look for trusted sources to ensure that we are getting that information from a trustworthy source. So that might mean asking, who wrote this? When was it written? Are they trying to sell me something as they're writing this? And then validating if we've heard this information before. And a lot of this can come down to common sense. And I hope everyone can feel confident in that when they're looking for different information. You can sometimes trust your gut feeling. And when in doubt, seek expert support. And as I've said, there are people in your corner that are ready to support. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But hearing that, are there any other comments or questions about any of the terms on the slide now? And we'll have lots of time at the end for question and answer where we can ask our questions verbally and speak up and hopefully dive into a little bit more things. But on to a very, very important topic. Hearing all the stress that we might be under as caregivers, I have a question for you. What comes to mind when you see this quote? And I'd love for you to read that to yourself now and either reflect, and you can say it out loud to yourself, or if you're willing to share, type it into the chat. So judging from the poll that I launched earlier, we're all feeling a lot of emotions, and some of those emotions that are on the more negative side. And seeing how that can wear us out and lead to that stress, that burnout, that compassion fatigue. And when we focus on the needs of others more than ourselves, we get to the point where we have nothing left to give. And that's where the you can't pour from an empty cup comes in. And I'm so happy someone put it into the chat, but it is the concept of putting your mask on first. So once again, we're going back to the time when we could go on airplanes. And in that first little bit in that presentation that no one was paying attention to, the flight attendant said, in case of emergency and air pressure drops, masks will descend from the ceiling. Before you help another put on their mask, ensure that you have fastened yours correctly first. And it's a simple concept, but there's a reason they have to tell us to do that, because our instinct is to help those around us. But we can't help those around us if we don't first take care of ourselves. So in the chat, we also have caring for the caregiver. And all of this, it seems simple when we say it out loud, but then in practice, it can be quite challenging. Because we can always think, oh, I'll just do that one more thing. And as we've said, it can be up to 20 hours a week, and fitting that in with potential other life roles is difficult. And so sometimes it's going to be small things, finding small ways that you fill your cup and take care of your own basic needs. And we all might have different strategies for how we deal with stress, how we de-stress ourselves. It can be something small, like having a cup of tea. And the challenges of COVID have emphasized the value of social connections and having someone to talk to. And for a lot of people, their de-stressing tools and strategies may have been completely rewired during COVID because our normal traditional avenues just weren't available. So one thing that I love hearing is how other people de-stress. So if you have a good tool that you like to use for de-stressing, I would love to hear it in the chat. Maybe it's reading a book or cooking a meal. One thing that we often can try to think about is also the aspects of caregiving that can help to fill our cup. A lot of the time we feel that social connection. So maybe it's sharing a meal with our loved one and feeling that sense of kinship. We had going for a walk. I think everyone has become just expert walkers, or maybe not expert, but appreciative walkers, and the value it can be of just getting outside. I know for myself, I quite literally like to run away from my problems. So when I'm stressed, if I have the chance, I want to go for a run. I find that helps me to express some of the energy that might have been built up, as well as just giving me that time to think with a clear head. I've got someone else who also wants to do some physical activity. I like it. Lifting heavy things, putting them down. That's also a good one. You can't see me now, but I'm not the person who looks like I lift heavy things. I'm very petite. Ice cream, that's a great self-care. Spending time with relatives who can find humor in the situation. Yes, finding, again, those social bonds can be so helpful. And recognizing our own well-being. And I like that it was connecting with a relative because they're also probably within that circle of care. So recognizing that, as I've mentioned, everyone in that circle of care is going to be impacted. So trying to not just say get more bang for our buck, but really thinking about how we can support all of those around us, but also combine that with supporting ourselves. So we've got taking baby steps versus drinking from the rim of the fire hose. Yeah, so breaking things down. Walking while listening to CBC ideas, great quality content there. Podcasts and walks are a very good afternoon activity. And so taking the moment, and even just if, at the end of the day, when we feel like we're so busy, we can't do anything, having a few breaths. And just taking a moment to maybe cycle through your breaths, having an awareness of the present moment. The concept of mindfulness has been popularized a lot in the past decade. And going at its core, it's just having that awareness of our own feelings and not judging them. So we can name them without labeling ourselves as, oh, I got really angry when I'm driving. I'm a horrible person, but I got really angry when I was driving. Okay, I can try to not do that again. And I can maybe think of just letting that emotion pass. I was angry, so what? Now I'm not angry. But taking that time to realize our emotions, name them, and then see ways that we can help to fill our cup. And so when we think of filling our cup and getting to a state of wellness, wellness is a very big topic. And this goes into one of the poll questions that was launched earlier. And so drawing on research, we can think of breaking down wellness into 8 different aspects to surmise a holistic element of wellness. And I think recognizing each individual element can help us to break down where we need to fill our cup up a little bit more. And so in our poll, we said that a lot of people felt like their emotional wellness has been the most impacted, as well as physical, financial, and spiritual. And I do want to highlight that some of these can go up with caregiving. Some people feel a greater sense of spiritual connection because of their caregiving role. And some people may be able to gain new social interactions, because it can be very easy to dwell on the negative, but I want to highlight some of the positives where we can and really celebrate those. And so we see some people that are finding strength in that spiritual wellness. So daily mass, got praying and giving back. And so recognizing if you can draw from each of these elements can sometimes be helpful, just to break down and also validate what you're spending time on. Because again, as we recommend, being a caregiver, wearing a lot of hats, feeling very busy. And so really seeing the value in, okay, I'm not just going for a walk, I'm filling up my emotional well-being, or I'm filling up my physical well-being, maybe emotional and physical at the same time, by getting out and going for a walk. And really recognizing which elements are being impacted. For those that are working caregivers, thinking of, okay, well, how has my occupational wellness been impacted? And have I had conversations with my HR department or with my manager about what accommodations can be made? And for some caregivers, the COVID has opened up the possibility of working from home, and that has meant that they are better able to balance sort of the competing demands in their life between work and caregiving. But taking each of them seriously and recognize them can help, again, just to work through the various changes that will be coming. And it can be a good place to have conversations with those in our circle of care, to break down and check in with them. And so next, I can't give you a detailed guide for how to be a caregiver, and no one can. But I have sort of, I'm not to say a 4-step plan, but almost in a bit of summarizing a lot of what I've said today so far, but wrapping it up in a bit more of a concise way. When we're approaching our caregiving journey, it can be helpful to start by deconstructing the situation and considering the different aspects. So that might be, as I said, with breaking down the elements of wellness, but also breaking down the caregiving role. And so for some people, this could be breaking down, what does the diagnosis mean? What is this disease or disability? And then maybe you're going to break it down into smaller chunks, thinking, okay, so this is the diagnosis, this is what the disease is broadly. What is that going to mean for my loved one? And considering maybe some of the individual aspects. And that might mean that, in an example, it could mean that recognizing that, okay, so this disease, it's not going to get better, it might even be progressing. And so my loved one will not be able to feed themselves. And that's not something I can control. And so I can recognize that, but I can consider just that element and just see that as a single part. And I can maybe deal with that single part rather than considering the whole diagnosis. Once we've seen some of those parts, it does come down to accepting. So recognizing that it's not anything against me or my caregiving, recognizing that this is just going to be part of the disease or part of the condition that my loved one is living with. So accepting that there are things that are beyond my control, and no matter what I do, my loved one will likely not be able to have the capacity to feed themselves. Accepting that and taking that as it comes can help us to feel better when things do happen, and maybe they're not the way we want them to happen, or maybe that's not how we plan for it to happen, but things will happen beyond our control. With this acceptance, it can help to take a step back and look at ourselves from an outsider. We're often much kinder to others. We think that we can provide more empathy for individuals when we're looking inside or we're looking from the outside, thinking that if we saw someone in a situation that we would describe ourselves in, they might say, oh, well, you should really get help or take a break. Thinking about how we can show that same kindness to ourselves. So recognizing that I can't control that my loved one is not going to be able to feed themselves, but I mean, maybe I can take some steps to be prepared for that so that when it does happen, I can feel ready. And even if it doesn't ever happen, I would be ready for that possibility. So maybe I can think that maybe I could consider what would it mean for me to go in and help feed my loved one. Or maybe I could consider what kind of external support I could bring in to help if that challenge were to come up. And part of that is recognizing that it's not always going to be on us. So considering what are those options. that caregiving should be a team effort. I've mentioned the circle of care a lot today, and recognizing support from others. And that can be other family members, other informal caregivers, or it could be professional caregivers. And it can also be someone who's going to support just us as a caregiver rather than supporting our loved one. And that can be a way that we can fill our cup. So I might mean getting a massage because that's going to be something that's going to help fill our cup and it's going to allow us to be better caregivers. Or it could be recognizing that if I'm going to be feeding my loved one, then I need more training, or I need financial support if I'm going to bring someone in, or if I'm going to do this, I need accommodations from my employer, or even just asking someone else on the family team, hey, can you take Tuesdays and Thursdays? Or can you take lunch and I'll take dinner? So sharing that load can help us to make it sustainable. The caregiving journey, as I've mentioned, is so varied. For some people, it can be a very short, acute time. For others, it can be decades. And there's no way to necessarily anticipate how long that's going to be. And so ensuring that we're making decisions not in the mindset of, I'll just make it to Friday, but seeing that it is sustainable and that we can bring other people in. One of the great quotes that I've heard about this is, we cannot get too efficient. Sometimes we don't want someone else to take on a role because we're just too good at it. We know that if someone else were to do it, they might not do it perfectly and it's going to take them longer than if we were to do it ourselves. But when we become too efficient and we don't let other people take it on, then we are still digging ourselves into a deeper hole. So that was a wonderful quote I heard from a caregiver. We can't be too good at it. And then our last thought really goes to healthy choices. And this is where things circle back to us as caregivers. Recognizing that, as I said, it can be a long haul, it can be a marathon. So looking at the elements of wellness that we spoke about earlier and considering our emotions throughout all of these decisions. How do we feel when we share the load? Is there someone we can talk to about that? And are we considering all of the elements of our wellness on that wheel? And so hopefully we're starting to hear this, and this might be clicking for some people. And you might be at the point now where you're thinking of, okay, I want to share the role, I want to share the load, or I want more information to really arm myself. Where can I go? And so obviously I'm very biased, but I do think that within the Caregiver Wellness Program, as I said at the outset, we are here to support you as caregivers. We can provide education through individual education sessions, or we have within our team, we have social workers to provide both group counseling or individual counseling. And we can really help to connect with individual needs. So we can provide education, and I've also listed some other education sites on the slide now. And we're also able to provide culturally specific content and support in Tamil for those that would prefer to hear this presentation in Tamil. And recognizing that it's going to be a scope of work that might be needed within that caregiving role, and that caring for ourselves and the other people in our lives can be just as important. So on the slide now, it just highlights some of the programs and services that are offered through the Scarborough Center of Healthy Community. And there's a scope of services, and for some, you might be connecting and saying that that would be really helpful for you. For others, you might not need them, but being aware of them, I think, can be really helpful. So as it mentions, we have Scarborough Ride, which can help provide transportation that is not Wheel-Trans and more user-friendly than Wheel-Trans, as well as education programs, active living centers. We have community kitchens and opportunities to support other individuals in your life that you might be supporting. And so we also have some upcoming educational sessions. And I'm sorry, because the October 18th one did just pass yesterday. But we have upcoming education series on making a will and power of attorney and some of those other big topics that we think about and that can really trip us up on the caregiving journey. And all of these sessions are free. And as it said, they're offered on Mondays from 1 to 2:30. And so with that, that is the end of my formal part of my presentation. I'd love to now open things up for questions.